Good morning. My name is David May from Great Britain, and my task this morning is to tell you everything you ever wanted to know about world ranking events, or rather what we can do in the time available. My qualification for doing this is that, as a member of the Photo Committee, as it was then called, I was in at the start of the World Ranking Scheme and have helped with its development over the past 25 years or so. It is one of my areas of responsibility within the current Photo Commission as a result. As you can see from the seminar invitation, the topics I'm going to be covering are a brief history of world ranking events from their birth to current times, how they compare with the normal national events that most federations put on, a delve into the World Ranking Manual and the important points therein, something about rule deviations, how and when to make them, etc. And in a separate section at the end, a little bit about the points calculation, which I hope to do without any mathematics. And finally, of course, there'll be time for questions. I want to start by taking you back to what I call the dark days, by which I mean the last century, but not quite as far as the picture on the photograph suggests, which is from the 1974 British Championships prize giving. Nothing to do with world rankings, of course, but I particularly like it as it is a classic photograph of Roger Bannister, the first man to break the 4-minute mile, who was also an occasional orienteer. Still in the dark ages, but working forwards to the mid-1990s, we had events labelled IOF-E on the IOF calendar, where E stood for elite. These were standalone events designed to be a step up from national to international races, such as the World Cup, but they needed to have a greater purpose. So, in the late 1990s, IOF Council decided to enhance IOF-E events by making them contribute to a brand new world ranking system. And so the concept of the World Ranking System and World Ranking Events was born, at least on paper. The technical side of hosting World Ranking events would be straightforward, as existing IOF-E events could easily be adapted. But how would a World Ranking points calculation work in practice, and how could the whole scheme be administered? Council gave this thorny problem to the first ever meeting of the Photo Committee, as it was then called, to solve. The main challenge was that runners in a small event in one of the weaker nations could have a very different standard from those in a big event in a strong nation. No point system which, say, gave 1,000 points to the winners would be fair, as the two winners could be of completely different ability. The World Cup scoring system works because much the same group of runners competes in each race, but that is not true of a race in Finland held on the same day as one in New Zealand. So the World Cup scoring system simply could not work for world ranking events. It's not just about starting with the points for the winner either. What about the rest of the field? In some races, runners are much of the same standard and their finish times are bunched together, whereas sometimes there's a big spread of ability in a race, with some runners taking up to 3 times longer than the winner. No system based on position can cover these possibilities. So we need to design a system which takes into account both the strength of the field and how well runners do on the day. Assuming such a system is possible, we need an automated way of calculating, storing and displaying results and points. And it needs to be able to give the right points to the right person. But we all know that runners' names can be spelled in different ways, or there might be misprints in the start lists. So how do we know that John Smith in one race is the same as John Smith in another? Or does he sometimes spell his name without the H? Some runners change their name at some stage, particularly if they get married. So how do we know that Jane Hughes in one race is the same as Jane Morgan in the next one? We cannot identify runners by name and need to develop an athlete ID system where the ID stays with the runner permanently. Luckily, at about this time, the British Federation was using a ranking system which answered many of these problems and which could potentially be adapted. David Rosen, currently chair of the Rules Commission, and I, amongst others, had been involved in developing and implementing the system, and David suggested to the IOF that they ask me to join the Photo Committee to help get things started. And so it was that I arrived in Budapest in March 1997, faced with an agenda which, amongst other things, included the topic of how to start a world ranking scheme from scratch. We worked on this during the coming months, and by the November meeting in Grimstad, along with the 1997 World Championships, we'd established an event framework and a scoring system which are not very different from the ones used today, some 26 years later. At this point, we had an algorithm which could calculate points at any race. However, it needed to know each runner's existing points in order to do so. But we had a blank sheet of paper to work from and no previous points. We needed to kick-start the system in some way, so at the November meeting we decided to use the results from WREs 95, World Cup 96 and WREs 97 to produce preliminary and experimental points. None of this would be of use if the system were then operated manually, as there were simply too many events to cope with. A Norwegian sports information interchange company called N3 Sport then agreed to take on the hosting, so we were then good to go. 1998 saw results from world ranking events, may still have been called IOF events at that point, I don't know, input into the system in the background, so that by the start of 1999 we were ready to publish the first IOF rankings points. What did these look like in practice? Well, here's a result list hosted by N3 Sport from an April 2000 event in Australia. There's an extremely high-class field shown here, the reason being that this race was the qualifier for a World Cup long final held the next day. This explains the non-standard winning time too. Note that, along with names and times, each runner has a unique ranking ID which enables the ranking points in the last column to be calculated and assigned to the right person. And here is what the ranking list looked like later on in 2000. N3 Sport also provided a portal for World Cup news, as well as Park World Tour, etc. Note also that the best 6 scores were used then, whereas it's the best 5 today, but there's an extra list for sprint now, a discipline which didn't exist at IOF level then. Since then, the importance of the rankings has been enhanced by building their use into qualification and start order for major events. 2 changes in the framework of the scheme were made in 2014 with the introduction of the separate list for sprint races, and in 2017 when the limit on the number of world ranking events a federation could stage was removed. How to treat major IOF events has also changed over time. At first, our top events such as WREs and World Cup had points boosted by 5%. This was then removed in 2012 and all races were treated as equal from the perspective of points award. A working party set up by Council proposed that major event winners should all receive the same points. For example, the WREs winner gets 1425 and others are scaled pro rata. But this meant a big difference between points at a normal world ranking event and points at a major event. So, from the beginning of this year, we reverted to the 1999 principle of enhancing points by 5% at WREs, 2.5% at World Cup and 1.25% at regional championships. During the period, various tweaks have been made to the algorithm to identify and take into account obviously anomalous results and to correct for points drifting with time. Nowadays, the list is administered by the IOF via IOF Eventor, the one shown being the orienteering as opposed to the sprint world ranking list, sometimes known as the forest list. So, how many world ranking events are we talking about? From 1999 and for the next few years, there were typically between 80 and 100 world ranking events, whereas this year we had 246 world ranking events in 39 different countries. Some 37% of the world ranking events were sprint races too. And of course there are also world ranking events in Skio, Mountain Bike-O and Trailo, 5 separate lists in all. However, today's focus is on the 2 foot orienteering disciplines. 25 years ago, it was not completely clear what the purpose of the then IOF elite races was. But from the start of the world ranking system, it's been hardwired into the concept that they help raise the profile of the sport, and standards within federations are not only raised, but that consistency of event quality is encouraged too. Athletes are motivated to get points which help them at major events. In addition, the world of sport expects rankings in each sport, which are independent of where athletes come from, and finally, and as before, it provides arguably the best tool for assisting with race qualification and start orders. The minimum requirement for a world ranking event is that 2 courses are provided, one for men's elite and one for women's elite. And some world ranking events are just that, and can have a small footprint as a result. However, most world ranking events are enhanced normal events, where an existing structure is augmented by converting the top 2 courses to IOF standards. They are normally long, middle or sprint distance events, and knockout sprint races have recently been included too. Mass start events are excluded by default, as they might be nothing more than a cross-country race where the fastest runner wins. However, if it can be shown that they are genuine orienteering challenges, for example by using chasing start races, then the Photo Commission is normally sympathetic to the rule deviation request. Qualifier and final races are also acceptable, but note that the final counts for ranking points and not the qualifier. Many multi-day events apply for more than one day to have world ranking event status, and this is fine, but there may be implications for the start draw after the first event is over, and the World Ranking Event Manual gives full details about this. Finally, races at WREs, World Cup, etc. count for world ranking points too, so are in effect world ranking events as well as the higher status event. As ever, full details are in the manual. I mentioned earlier that most world ranking events are enhanced normal events, where an existing structure is augmented by converting the top 2 courses to IOF standards. But what does this enhancement mean? Does it impose a large extra burden on event officials? The answer is that it depends. So what are the main features to consider? Firstly, that the world ranking event has to be run under IOF rules and not local ones, so that a consistency of event standard is achieved wherever it is held. It also means that we often have the scenario that a large national event is run under local rules, except that the top 2 courses, M and W21E, are run under IOF rules. In most federations, there is a huge overlap between the 2 sets of rules, so disruption is minimized. It is the appointment of the IOF event advisor which is critical to bringing the event standards into line with those of the IOF, and he or she should be appointed by the federation concerned at the earliest possible point. With some 297 advisors from 47 different IOF federations, there are usually enough to choose from, but if not, it is possible to appoint someone from an adjacent country instead. Other significant differences relate to having to have a jury composed of existing event advisors, the use of IOF Eventor for making entries complete with IOF IDs for each elite runner and hosting information such as bulletins, start lists and results, a range of details which may or may not already be provided, such as refreshments on the course, a model event, a time start rather than a punching one, a backup timing system, and so on. The mandatory use of the World Ranking Event Manual is also needed, and that's covered by the next slide. Briefly, at this stage, the manual is an essential supplement to the main IOF competition rules and helps organisers to achieve the aims of the World Ranking Event. The IOF competition rules are, of course, a starting point and contain the rules which underpin all types of competition. But each type of competition is different from others and may have specialist mandatory requirements as well. World ranking events are no different, and one thing that the manual does is to describe rules which are special to world ranking events and for which there is no room in the main rules. These are marked in bold type in the text. And of course, a good deal of useful guidance and advice is included too. The manual aims to be up to date with respect to any competition rules changes, etc., so is issued at the beginning of each calendar year with any changes shown by lines printed in the left margin. I'll be looking at this document again later on. Returning to what makes a world ranking event different, I want to cover this by looking at 2 examples at opposite ends of the world ranking event spectrum. The first example looks at the JK, a 4-day event which rotates around the 12 regions of the British Federation, typically having an entry of 3,000 or 4,000. From 1967, it has been held over the Easter weekend on an annual basis and was started in memory of Jan Källström, a Swedish orienteer who played a big role in the development of British orienteering. It often attracts a significant entry from outside the UK, so it's an obvious choice for IOF enhancement. It already has M&W21E courses, and it has a high status both inside and outside the UK. It always has a commentary, well-organised arenas, and a substantial infrastructure, etc. The event consists of 3 individual days, sprint, middle and long, followed by a relay. All 3 individual days are often upgraded to world ranking event status. But how does this process take place? In the ideal world, terrains are selected and an organiser is appointed up to 3 years beforehand. If the terrains are good enough, a decision to apply for world ranking event status is agreed, and within 3 months an event advisor is selected. He or she is not formally appointed yet, but is in place at an early enough stage to be able to help shape the 2 elite courses. There are currently 12 British event advisors on the list, so there are normally enough to appoint from. If not, appointing from outside Britain has to be done. When all are agreed, BOF makes an application to the IOF office for world ranking event status. It's at this stage that the organisers need to consider whether or not they need to request a rule deviation to meet some non-standard proposal. For example, terrain restrictions may be that the men's middle race has a winning time of 25 minutes rather than the 30 to 35 minutes stipulated by IOF rules. The world ranking event application would then have to include a request from the organiser, supported by the event advisor, for such a deviation along with reasons. IOF will then consider the request and reply with its decision. If all is well, the IOF then approves the world ranking status and the races go on to the event or calendar. Sometimes event advisors are not involved until IOF approval has been given, in which case they need to make a visit to the terrain and liaise with all key officials as soon as possible. British rules and IOF competition rules are very similar for elite races, so the event advisor's job should be easy. But differences do remain, and these must be spotted at an early stage. One of these refers to arrangements for the start, where a pre-start area is advised, which is quiet, has a warm-up area, toilets, drinks, etc. The list on the slide is taken from section 16 of the World Ranking Event Manual. At the JK, the elite start is often combined with the start for all the other courses, so a quiet waiting area is not achievable. However, the organisers usually impose a silent start on all competitors, so at least some quietness is achieved in the start lanes. But the best way to achieve the aim of quietness is to separate out the elite starts from all the others, if only by a few metres. There's usually no problem in providing a warm-up area, and this is standard at events such as the JK. Toilets might be available if the start is some way from the arena and if there is sufficient access to get them in place, but this is not always the case. All starts will have a race time display, so this is already in place, and Level A events in Britain require start lists in the pre-start, so this is covered too. However, drinks are rarely available in the pre-start at Easter. Brandy might be more appropriate to some conditions, and the JK wouldn't normally have a model control in the pre-start either. So, only 2 of the 6 features listed above would normally be provided at the JK. Is this a problem? Will the event not count as a world ranking event if they are not provided? The answer is no, because it is not mandatory to have these, and the word should indicates this. It doesn't mean that organisers can ignore anything associated with should, however. As it states in the World Ranking Event Manual, should refers to statements where it is strongly advised that they are followed. So, in the case of toilet provision, it may be impractical to have toilets of 3,000 competitors at the pre-start, but it might be possible to have one just for the use of the elite M&W21s. One way to consider the start is that it should be as close an approximation as possible to the start conditions athletes encounter at major IOF events, and the more items on the list which are provided, the more the start feels like the real thing. Good course planning is required for both a non-world ranking event JK and for a JK day which is a world ranking event, so there should be no difference in quality because of the world ranking event status. Winning times are the same too. In addition, British course planning rules are the same as those for IOF events, and again, World Ranking Event status makes no difference. However, a JK needs up to 30 different courses to be planned, and it is recognised that creating unique courses for M and W21E may not be possible. The manual states in section 14 that in many competitions, the World Ranking Event courses will form just 2 courses out of very many more than this, and fairness becomes harder to achieve. When this happens, the number of controls which are common to other courses must be an absolute minimum. One way of achieving this is to aim for an average of no more than 2 runners passing through any given control per minute. Best advice here is to make the 2 courses as separate as possible from the others, but understand that some compromise will be necessary. One compromise which is not available, however, relates to drinks controls on the course. Easter in the UK is rarely hot, although JK temperatures of 25°C have very occasionally been known, so planners rarely need to cater for refreshment points. But IOF Rule 19.9 makes it mandatory to provide refreshment points where the winning time exceeds 30 minutes, which means that 1 drinks point is needed for the middle race, whilst 3 are required for the long distance. British Level A events have to provide backup for timing and results, and this covers IOF Rule 23.8, which says 2 independent timekeeping systems, a primary and a secondary, must be used continuously throughout the competition. And now that there is no longer an IOF requirement about offset printing, the British Level A map requirements match those for World Ranking events. Thus, the only course enhancement needed for World Ranking event status at a JK is the need for refreshment controls. No event is 100% perfect. Most of the time, errors are minimal and are usually not noticed by competitors, but from time to time, a competitor will complain about some aspect of the race, and this complaint may possibly get as far as the race jury for adjudication. The sequence of events, complaint to protest to jury, is very similar at both BOF and IOF levels, but there is one significant difference between them, relating to the composition of the jury. At British Level A events, the jury is composed of 3 Grade A controllers who then elect a chair from within them. The event controller is separate from this group. At IOF level, the jury consists of 3 voting members, if possible from different federations, Rule 29.12. They should be IOF licensed event advisors if possible. The event advisor for the event chairs the jury but does not have a vote. So the JK will often appoint 2 juries, one for the elite events under IOF rules and a separate one for the rest of the event under BOF rules. Just as for every event, each World Ranking event has someone responsible for quality control, and a World Ranking event has 2 individuals who share this responsibility. The World Ranking Event Manual states that the World Ranking event must have a controller, called the National Controller by some federations, whose major responsibility is to confirm that the event is organised fairly and in accordance with the IOF rules and this manual. It goes on to state that the controller approves courses and their fairness, approves every control site via visits, and approves control descriptions and their production. The manual also states that the IOF advisor has a list of special tasks, 3 of which are listed on the slide. To advise officials, including the organiser, planner and controller, on the special features of the World Ranking event and on IOF rules, and the contents of the World Ranking Event Manual. And one particular task is to approve terrain, maps, courses and their planning as far as M and W21E is concerned. Because there is a clear overlap between the 2 job descriptions, it's essential that the event advisor and the controller get together at as early a stage as possible and agree on the division of responsibility between them. In the case of the JK, the controller, who may also have an assistant, will have spent and will be spending a great deal of time in the terrain dealing with all the other courses and control sites as well as for the 2 elite courses, whilst the event advisor's time is often more limited. Both should have first-hand knowledge of the terrain, of course. There are many ways in which the event advisor and the controller can agree to share their responsibilities, and this slide shows 3 possible models. The first one is perhaps the most common. Assuming the controller spends much more time in the terrain than is available to the event advisor, and is checking sites, etc. in the forest for the non-world ranking event courses, it makes sense for the event advisor to delegate this work to the controller for the elite courses as well. In essence, the controller becomes the event advisor's assistant and will have to check every detail in the forest, whereas this is not so necessary for the event advisor. However, the controller has to recognize that the event advisor has the final say in all aspects of course planning, control sites, etc. The second model has the event advisor taking all responsibility away from the controller for the elite courses. This means that they will have to do all the detailed checking that the controller would normally do, this taking some of the load off the controller. Sometimes the day controller is also an IOF licensed event advisor and is happy to add the extra world ranking event responsibility to their role. This saves on manpower, but may result in a conflict of interest. One key feature is that it doesn't matter what the local rules are, where there is a difference, the IOF rules take priority. The JK example just discussed shows that since a large event often has most of the enhancements associated with world ranking status already in place, the difference between being a world ranking event and not being a world ranking event are not that many. The extract from the World Ranking Event Manual shown confirms this and goes on to emphasize the key role of the event advisor. The differences between a small world ranking event, which has just 2 courses of, say, 100 runners total, and a small public race, which also has 100 runners, are much greater, mostly because the standards expected for the world ranking event are much higher. International standards are needed for the maps, the course planning and quality control, timekeeping and backup systems, etc., etc., many of which have been mentioned in the JK example just now. On the other hand, no compromises need to be made regarding other courses and other runners, as the event is exclusive for the elite. It is perfectly possible to put on what's called a bare bones world ranking event and still meet quality requirements. Moving on to the World Ranking Event Manual, this made its first appearance in 2001 as a 2-page document and was enlarged to 15 pages in 2002 and has been improved every year since then to grow to the 26 pages of the 2023 edition. It's currently available from the Event Organizing section of the IOF website. See the path on the slide and the link in red below. The sequence of topics covered in the manual takes you through the progress of an event from applying at the start, section 1, to the reports which need to be written after the event is over, section 26. Many of the section titles are also to be found in the main IOF competition rules, and where this happens, space is available in the manual to add extra guidance about how the rules are to be applied. One example relating to terrain embargoes, where section 13 describes compromise solutions for embargoing sprint terrain in, for example, town centres. Space is also available to include other mandatory aspects of a world ranking event which are not specified in the main rules. One small example in section 12 is that the IOF logo must be printed on the competition map. Another relates to how the run-in is to be organised in the arena and is described in section 19. One of the most important sections is that regarding start lists in section 4, especially as each event appears to have its own special circumstances regarding the start draw. The section covers what happens if the event is a national championship. Does this make a difference? It explains that you can have a start draw based in blocks, randomized within each block, how to handle races based on the qualification plus final principle, and what happens if a course has too many entries, how to split it, and how to submit results for ranking. The sections on Eventor, entries and results give essential information not available in the competition rules, whilst the appendix gives advice regarding those few world ranking events which have live arena commentary, live broadcast, and no athletes quarantine. Earlier on, I talked of when and how to request rule deviations, but in general, the rules surrounding a world ranking event are such that there should be few reasons to deviate from them at all. and indeed, in practice, it is only a small minority of world ranking events which feel they have a problem with the rules. In practice, rule deviation requests are sent to the IOF office, who then ask the FUTO Commission to adjudicate. FOC then sends its verdict back to the office, who then inform the world ranking event organizer of the decision. It has to be said that many organizers would save themselves a good deal of time by checking with the World Ranking Event Manual before they think about a deviation request, as maybe 50% of the requests we received are already answered by the manual. Many requests are related to start draws, as mentioned before, and the list above shows that most can be answered by studying section 4 on start lists. I can't stress highly enough the importance of knowing what the manual contains. I'll give you a short time now to look down the list. I've now described where world ranking events come from and what they are today, explain what makes them different from normal national events, outline the significance of the World Ranking Event Manual, and made a passing reference to rule deviations. I'll be going on to the nitty-gritty of the rankings algorithm shortly, but first it's time for questions.